it can be very ivory towerish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and so how do we deal, kind of as we're talking about planning for the conference, that whole issue. So I think there's multiple layers, one of the articles I really wish I would have sent the class, that I have been reading over the last couple of weeks. This one guy, one of the things that he talks about, that even urban agriculture, has to own, is that in some big cities like New York and other places, it is also associated, with the issues of gentrification.
Right.
And even, when you say hire people from the neighborhood, so if you take, and I'm not saying this to pick on them, but if you take an organization like City Split Slickers or Planning Justice,
mm-hmm.
They've hired people, from communities in West Oakland and places like that, but they ain't a part of the leadership.
Right. Yeah, like Tesla. Tesla's employing a lot of brothers and sisters, for their assembly line work, because those they're when the robots go down, they go down for a long time.
Right. Right. So we got to be honest and real about some of that. That there's one thing about hiring people. There's another thing about folks, that grow, into leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I meant about around the educating. It's like, if you're going to do this, then make sure you start educating that neighborhood.
Sure.
I mean, because it's not that complex. It's like some electrical.
But it is about exposure.
Yeah.
It is about exposure and opportunity, though.
Right.
It's funny. Alberto came by here today.
Oh yeah.
And Alberto spent about an hour with me today, and I'm trying to, I'm hoping that Alberto is gonna stay here for the summer, because I told him that we'll give him like a summer stipend if he does, like the robotic stuff, or solar energy and wind energy with the kids, right?
Right.
And what I want him to do, because this kind of fits with our presentation tonight, that I'd love for him to connect the robotic stuff to to its impact and influence on agriculture. Right. And what Alberto said, he said, man, this is really cool. He was looking at some of the kits that we had, right? And he said, what's really cool is, now this is an engineering student up at Cal, right? Alberto says, he said, man, when I was like, in middle school, or high school, he said, I would have loved, to just have an opportunity either in an after school program or even in some of my classes, to have exposure. He said, I had to go seek a lot of that stuff out. He said, because he said, man, even if we can do workshops and stuff, he said, man, this would be really good. And he said, because man, he said a lot of times, kids don't even have they say they don't have interest, but they've never been exposed to something. Nobody's ever given them the opportunity, to try certain things out. So they don't know one way or the other. So exposure and opportunity is important. You can't make nobody do nothing, but All right. So we are 6:05. How's everybody doing tonight?
Good.
It's good to see you all. As we continue to populate, we have another long presentation tonight, and kind of what we're looking at We'll probably do it in 2 or 3 segments. Like we'll do some tonight, but we're going to reserve about a half hour for any last things y'all want to talk about before you start presentations, and then we may do a portion of it at the beginning of class next week. So however it works, we can talk about it. But one of the disclaimers that we're going to talk about is that we're going to be talking about ecotechnologies tonight. But in reality, there's a couple of special ones that we're not going to talk about. We're not going to talk about aeroponics per se. We're not going to talk about aquaponics per se, because we're probably going to do an exclusive presentation on aquaponics and aeroponics. And so while we talk about some things related to it, we don't really get into that tonight. Okay. Any questions before we get started? And again, we are going to reserve 30 to 45 minutes for you all to get out any last bugs before class presentations start next week. So that time will be reserved for you.
I have a general question, if this is the time.
Sure.
I'm wondering, well, I guess I have 2 questions. One is, would it be possible for me to get your guys' emails just in general? Because I've had stuff about presentations and I've left comments and stuff, but not heard back from either of you. And I'm wondering if there's just like a better way to be contacting you guys.
Yeah. I will put my email and my phone number in the chat for you.
Awesome. I would love that. And also my second thing is, I don't know if this would apply to anybody else, but I'm definitely I don't know. I'm like, I used to farm and now I'm like definitely inspired by this group. And I wonder if you guys have any like connections or job posting things, or like if you keep track of opportunities for people to dive into agroecology. I don't know if that's something you guys do or anything, but
when you say
I'm
something
looking.
that we do, you talking about Mike and I and CFFJ?
I don't know, in maybe MESA does something. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think
like
we all get
connection to work.
We all get contacts, where things do come across our desk. And what I can do when they do come, I can definitely have Michael post them in classroom and everything like that. But
yeah, that'd be awesome.
we do get things that come up. Sometimes they may be specific to youth. Other times, they may be specific to college students, but whatever comes through, we can definitely make sure.
That would be awesome. Thanks so much.
Sure. Erica, student presentations start next week. And Mike is good. I'm sorry, Mike.
I'm sorry, just Erica and Sanjita are starting off.
Are we presenting tonight or next week?
Next week.
Okay, awesome.
And I've put my phone number and email in the chat. Correct, next Wednesday, because our Earth Day Symposium is next Thursday, which if you have not registered, I'll have Michael put the website in the chat again, or the flyer in the chat, and it'll take you right there. we're encouraging everybody to register. It's going to be a pretty strong symposium that we're looking for. We had a great meeting today. We're looking forward to it, and love to see y'all in there. Other question?
The link on the website for the Earth Day was not working as of today. Like I tried to log in, and it kind of took me to the Zoom meeting, but it wouldn't let me register. So I'm not sure what's wrong with the link. Like you can't put it as a calendar or sign up.
Thank you for telling me that, Mike. Michael, check it out. Michael, check it out, and hopefully we'll resolve it before class ends tonight and get you all on there so you can go.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Anything else? All right, Mike, why don't you go ahead and share a screen?
Hold on, just doing something funny. What happens when you download stuff? Where is my?
As he's pulling it up, our topic is ecotechnology or green technology and agroecology. When you think about technology as it relates to agriculture or sustainability, or agroecology in particular, what comes to mind? Just play some word association with me while Mike is getting it together. What are the words that come to your mind?
To be honest, I feel like conflict. I don't know. I'm thinking of like the Green Revolution.
Okay. Anybody else? Nobody else?
I feel like with the technology, we have an increase in production, but it's kind of short-sighted.
Okay.
Yeah, because long term, we don't know what the effects are.
Anybody else? When you say long-term effects, are those only physical, or
No.
are there other issues?
I think like the soil degradation, the use of fossil fuels, everything that we don't know the consequences yet.
Okay.
And so it's like, if I just think of it, it's like undetermined consequences from these technologies that we feel are necessary, but may not be long-term useful.
What about the impact on the farmer? So we definitely talk about issues of soil degradation. There's controversy around, do they aid or not aid? We'll get into some of that tonight, in the reduction of environmental degradation or harm, particularly as it relates to climate, depending on the technology. But what about the social inputs?
It's a lot easier to manufacture a large crop when you have all these machinery. I mean, it's so much less labor intensive.
Very true. But are the farmers getting this technology for free?
No. Yeah, they're in debt. It's a very expensive debt-based.
Okay.
I would also say, like, in terms of impact on farmers, I'm thinking about like farm workers and pesticides and like Roundup ready crops and, like Roundup spraying and long-term effects of that. And also in terms of like, when I think of technology as just like in a way, like even the wheel is like technology, like
That's
everything
right.
is kind of technology. So something that came up for me when I don't know if I've mentioned it to the group, but like just doing research in, I don't know, just when I have spent time in this indigenous community in the Andes, a lot of people were talking about how like some people can afford tractors or not, but that's like a privilege. And then I don't know, and some people would say it's just like a sign of colonialism. So like even like there's a loss sometimes of culture that can
Okay.
happen through the new entering of technology. Sorry, that was long-winded.
No. That's precisely, because those are some of the things that we gotta raise today. Because again, we talk about soil and waterways, which we're going to be talking about tonight, and all this, and very well we should. But we often, and this is very Western, we often don't talk about the social impacts on the people,
Mm-hmm.
because they are largely peasant and indigenous. So it's something
Yeah.
that we need to think about. And most of them are not in a position to afford where they're farming at, whether in urban centers or rural areas. They're not able to afford many of these technologies.
Yeah.
So we need to contextualize that. So that's really good. So that's kind of the backdrop about what we need to talk about today. Again, this is not exhaustive. We're probably going to do this presentation over 2 or 3 sessions, but I do want us to think about some of the technologies, how they intersect, and I want y'all to push back. I want y'all to push back, because some of the stuff may seem like it's etched in stone, and others may say, I'm not so sure. So go ahead, Mike. I do think we need to start at home, because one of the things I definitely hear from y'all, how it impacts us right here. And obviously, when Marissa talking about being in communities in the Andes, and there have been those of us that have participated or observed in farming, urban and rural farming places, Central America, Cuba, and other parts of the Caribbean, and other nations. But what does that mean for us here in California, right? How does high tech, impact agriculture in California? The first thing I think we need to understand, agriculture represents $50 billion annually in economic development in this state. California grows over 400 crops. A third of the country's vegetables and 2/3 of fruits and nuts are grown in California. The irony is, we often talk about the citrus industry in Florida. We talk about the citrus industry in Florida and Texas. We talk about the so-called breadbasket of America being those Midwestern states. California is far and away the biggest agricultural producer in the nation. Let's never forget that. So, and obviously, I don't care about, Elon Musk and others that are moving out of the state. The central nervous system of technology for the United States is still in California. And that's a great juxtaposition that, the vegetable basket, if you will, of America is California's Central Valley. And pretty much less than 100 miles from that, right, is the epicenter of technology, which is Silicon Valley. But in that, we know crops are threatened like other plants are around climate change. And up the road in Silicon Valley and other places, right? The issues of artificial intelligence, particularly with precision agriculture, we'll get into in robotics, are being developed and implemented right on farms, right? And part of that is to identify certain crops and weeding patterns, to develop grower dashboards so the farmer, in theory, is more informed about healthy choices and sustainable choices that they will make. That's not always the case, but that is the theory. But it brings together, high tech and farming, this clash or this engagement between engineers and tech people and farmers, right? Bringing them together. When I say clash, doesn't necessarily always mean in a bad way. But it is important that when you start talking about things like vertical farming that we'll get into, right, that it uses about only 1% of the land that traditional agriculture use. And we know in a day and age when we live, that land is at a premium. So what does that mean? Also, there are water considerations, right? We've talked about this a little bit in this class, but 70 to 90% of surface water on the planet, right, goes to agricultural irrigation. That is huge. So when we talk about issues related to climate and how we look at alternatives, there does need to be some discussion, not just in California, but globally, about where we go, with the issue. Next slide. So we're going to look at about 6 areas. We may not get to all of them tonight, but we want to talk about what is climate smart agriculture. Then we'll talk about PA or precision agriculture, talk about water technologies, and then specifically we'll talk about vertical farming, and then solar and wind power. And then finally, we'll conclude with artificial intelligence, drones, and robotics. I said, again, we did not include things like aquaponics and aeroponics in this presentation, because we're going to actually do a separate piece specifically on those, not only as technologies, but as farm strategies. Next slide. So is it a future of possibilities? We need to lift up, and this is why I started this discussion, right? So we know that farms and urban farms, particularly, they grow food in the middle of a population center. Space is a premium, but creativity and technology are not. The technology that exists supports urban farms to become more powerful and less expensive each year. What do you think about that? Is that true? Is that debatable? What are your thoughts about that?
I think that's debatable.
Debatable, yeah. I told you I put some nuggets in there for y'all to mull over.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you want me to continue, but I definitely.
No, you continue. You continue.
Okay. I would say okay. Why do I really disagree with that? One, I definitely disagree that there's always that it's possible for it to be less expensive and even powerful. I feel like from reading actual studies about agroecology, which is in a lot of ways getting rid of a lot of the classic agro technology stuff that as Erica said has short-term benefits but long-term harm. I think, yeah, so I would debate both of them, because also something I think about is that the agro tech industry, I guess, I mean, it's for profit, and a lot of it is trying to be trendy in a way.
Mm-hmm.
With the youths, or with millennials, Instagram. I'm starting to get Instagram ads about different types of technologies. So the fact that that's for profit makes me doubt that for sure. I don't know.
John Deere is not getting into robotics because they want to lift up agroecology, right? Okay. That's what I'm saying. You gotta
Even
be careful.
even with this, like I read a book a while ago about I do weather and soil stuff and stormwater management. It's like my job stuff career. And the fact of like with the previous administration, typically we would have the NOAA, which is a free governmental agency providing weather service stuff for ag for all these things and oceans. But they made it consumer based, where the people that are in charge of the environmental technology stuff are now, you know, the CEOs of AccuWeather and Chevron and all these other things, to
Right.
where the technology is there, but if you can't afford it, it's not given to you. It's only when you can afford these technologies to become more profitable, but many people can't afford to get into those things.
There you
So
go.
it's a tough spot.
Very good. Let's go to the next slide. So let's get into climate smart agriculture and its role and what that means. Next slide quickly. Climate smart agriculture, CSA, conceptually, it links the areas of climate change and food security. CSA is an approach to agriculture development that aims to increase productivity, to improve resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So everything that Erica and Marissa were really kind of talking about, one of the pushbacks over the last 10 years has been in this integration of technology to really have technology that is climate smart, that really takes into account the environmental impact as well as the impact on human capital. But that in and of itself is still not without its own controversy. Next slide. So, whenever you see me with one of these long quotes from the UN, it is deliberate. You got to be careful with the UN, right? Because a lot of times there's great information that comes out of the UN, but sometimes some of that information, is really linked into what y'all was saying that, so you get these UN reports and you get UN executives that, when you start really tracing it, when they leave their posts as ambassadors, or undersecretaries, they end up becoming corporate giants. So just be careful about that. But the FAO estimates that feeding the world population will require a 60% increase in total agricultural production, with many of the resources needed for sustainable food security already entrenched. Stretched. The food security challenges are huge. At the same time, climate change is already negatively impacting agricultural production globally and locally. Climate risks to cropping, livestock, and fisheries are expected to increase in coming decades, particularly in low-income countries where adaptive capacities is weaker. Impacts on agriculture threaten food security and agriculture in the agricultural sector. If emissions from land use change are also included, generates about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. How does that make you feel? How does that make you think?
First thing that I get curious about is sort of where the 60% increase, what that number is sort of based on. Is that doing things as we have been doing them? Is that taking into account the amount of land that we're using to grow soy and corn for cattle, instead of using that land to grow other vegetables or to graze cattle more, I don't know, responsibly? I mean, to me,
in this particular study, I do know that is at baseline level. So that would assume that things are continuing on the patterns that they've been on.
And that makes me curious, like, would that percentage change if we were to adopt more climate friendly approaches to agriculture? You know, and what would that look like? I mean, that's what gets my wheels turning, you know, is figuring out, is this just doing the same thing that we've been doing, you know, in the past 20 years, or is it changing things?
So the question, I think that those are excellent insights. And here's the question. So remember when we were doing the presentation on biochar, and I said to you all that the data in some ways is all over the map, particularly when you start talking about things like carbon sequestration. And, there are some scientists that basically say and think about, if you, in keeping carbon in the soil, as opposed to, allowing it into the atmosphere, you can reduce greenhouse gases tremendously. And others say, well, there may be some reduction, but it's nowhere near what folks say. And I think that, you don't really know certain things until they are tested, tried and true over time. And then I don't know if I ever told you, y'all, this story. When I started graduate school, I had taken a graduate level statistics class from a guy who was one of the top statisticians from the National Football League. And the class was called How to Make Statistics Lie. How to make data lie. And we don't like to hear that because, we try to be a very empirical and data-driven society in many ways. Well, I guess until like the last administration, at least. But we tend to not really want to, discount data. But sometimes, it's really about, who's submitting and manipulating, controlling the data that is submitted. So I just think that you do have to have an open mind and be willing, to check sources and do quality research, and still, be honest with the fact that you may not be 100% sure.
Right. Yeah, the disturbing thing about this quote is, where's the dates on here? It's like, by year what? What are they talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah, something off of the point made before. I have similar questions about just like what are the underlying assumptions here? Like even the very first sentence about like requiring a 60% increase in agricultural production. When I was working at Food First, which I've mentioned before, but it's kind of just like it's a nonprofit that does a lot of agroecology type of like political writing and stuff.
I know it very well.
Yeah. It's awesome. But yeah, so like one of their sayings, I guess, was just like, we have enough food, it's just about distribution. So it's like when they say like if you look at how much food is wasted and how much food is accessible to, like excessive amounts of food is accessible to those with more privilege. Like if we were to just like, in my opinion, like decolonize and like take the capital encouragement to do that out of the situation, like food could be properly distributed, but it's not. So like even that first sentence, I'm like, okay, you have this underlying assumption that food will be distributed the exact same way that it is right now. And like, so like, and then, yeah, there's like, and it's playing into this like overpopulation kind of myth. There's like sometimes truth to it for sure, but like just this idea of like this panic about the growing population and needing to produce more and more, when actually like at the root of it, that's definitely not the whole story.
Yeah, and the root of it, let's be real, the root of it is market economics. And here's the thing, even about food production and food distribution. I may have shared this with y'all during the first presentation that we did in the class around food systems, right? See, the thing you got to be real about is we live in a society that attempts to monetize everything.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, we will hone in on the food system, or we'll hone in on agriculture, but it stands to reason that whatever, we talk about, tends to get monetized if someone or some institution can profit from it. I mean, that's, I know we don't like hearing that, but it's real. Yeah, most of y'all too young. When I was a kid, when me and Mike was kids, there was a thing in the 70s that was a wave, for a couple of years. Pet rocks. You remember pet rocks, Mike?
Yeah, my mom had one.
Pet rock.
I had a pet rock.
Yeah, pet rock.
I had a pet rock too.
So y'all, somebody know what I'm talking about.
Is it literally a rock?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally a rock.
Literally a
I had
rock.
a pet rock.
With the face painted on it sometimes.
Yep, you face paint them.
Yeah, I had a face paint on mine. I guess I'm dating myself too.
Yeah, you face paint them. And so even even things that I hate to go there, but when we start talking about intellectual property and intellectual property rights, especially as it relates to, to like pharmaceuticals and agricultural products, I mean, it's really deep. So you think about plants and products that, that essentially, have been in use, for millennia, with ancestral people. And then, some big drug company, some herbicidal company or whatever, their conglomerate. So they'll go in, to the Amazon rainforest or up in the Andes or, or somewhere in East Asia. And, and then they say they discovered a plant that the indigenous people's been using for thousands of years. And, they say, okay, the indigenous people can still use it, but if it goes outside of this village, then you got to pay us for it because we stole it fair and square. See, it's the whole mindset of what that means. And that will drive how we start thinking about, production and distribution.
I feel
Next
that
slide.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please keep talking.
About like fungi. I've like recently started getting into it, and there are a few like white men who are like at the forefront of like, Paul Stamets, who's really cool and like speaks a lot about how fungi can help change the world and be medicinal, but like they've come from indigenous cultures who've been using them for millennia. And then there's this kind of like discovery aspect, like you said, like discovery and selling.
Sure.
That honestly reminds me of permaculture too.
Well,
like, just saying.
Well,
I know how you feel about it, but just
no,
like,
I mean, but it's real.
Yeah.
There is a guy, I hate to say this, that wrote a book. The disclaimer is this dude is a Marxist. He wrote the book 30 years ago. This guy, Alec Kalinikos, and he wrote a book called The Revenge of History. And he wrote the book in the wake of the fall of the former Soviet Union. And it was really about, capitalism versus communism. And he deconstructs the argument because, the argument was with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union that, capitalism had won out over communism. And Kalinikos postulates that, well, first of all, not only, is that not necessarily true, he deconstructs the argument because he says that in the Soviet Union, you did not see, communism. What you really witnessed was what he called state-sponsored capitalism. And the irony is, with the fall of the Soviet Union and the rebirth, of Russia, particularly Putin's Russia, and the oligarchs, right? You start to see that, you can talk about Jeff Bezos all you want, but reports are that Putin is really the richest man in the world because he basically owns the government. He basically owns the government, and so what Kalinikos says is that's not communism. That's just a different form of capitalism controlled by a couple of people. And then he says, but let's just take the argument. Now remember, he's writing this 30 years ago. He says, let's just take the argument that the US and the West won. And again, 30 years ago, he's talking about, the issues around, food injustice, around, the prison industrial complex in the United States, declining levels, of education, racial and ethnic and gender tension throughout the nation. And and he raised the question. He's like, really, did you really win, or was there a price to be paid and repercussions that continue down the line? So I do think that you have to have a very trained eye on the issues, because one of the things that society will do to us is try to socialize you to a point where you don't question the way y'all been saying tonight. Oh, well, if we don't do this to increase productivity because of population growth, we got a real problem on our hands. But nobody's stopping to say, well, A, is that really accurate? B, if it is, why is that? And C, if we're turning the corner with other strategies and other methodologies, are we still staying on this course, or is there another outcome that we at least suspect or anticipate? Keep on going, Mike. So a new kind of CSA. So again, climate smart agriculture should really help farmers to build resilience. And this is something that's kind of farmer driven. I think that's really important to build resilience, with regard to the impact of climate change, to really look at, the sustainability of increasing agricultural production. I think the one thing that we have to be honest about, for most farmers, whether you are a woman, like most farmers in the world are women that are trying to feed their family, you cannot escape the issue of productivity. Now, the levels may be some cause for debate, but no one who is farming for a livelihood, wants to be in a position where their land does not produce, right? Whether you're, producing to eat, producing to sell, barter, or whatever it is, you want to be able to produce. And then you talk about, how climate smart agriculture also reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that part is equally as important. Right. So it's about productivity, resilience, and the reduction of emissions, particularly greenhouse gases. Next. So there is climate smart agriculture and everything related to it. But then there is PA, or precision agriculture. And precision agriculture basically is almost a catch-all for digital, technologies. And I don't even want to just say to enhance productivity, because they will say it enhances sustainability, but we're going to get into that. Anybody heard of the term precision agriculture? And what does that make you think? Next slide. So it's also known often by the names of satellite farming or site-specific farm management. It's a farm management concept based on observing, measuring, and responding to inter and intra-field variability in crops, with the goal of optimizing returns on inputs while preserving resources, and generally enabled by GPS and GNSS, global navigating systems or global positioning systems. But walk with me through that one line: the goal of optimizing returns on inputs while preserving resources. That is straight, economic, market economic language. Does that bother you? Does that fall in line with your understanding of what agriculture, whether we're talking about sustainability or productivity, does that fall in line with what you're thinking?
I think it could. I think it depends on how you read the statement. When I saw the words preserving resources, I actually thought of it from more of an agroecological standpoint. If you see like labor and I guess like the human aspect that goes into farming as also like a equally valuable resource as like material capital.
Very well. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm glad that comment was made before me, because I was about to be like, wow, I have never like read a more emotionally disconnected and like kind of colonialist phrasing of agriculture, like
Yep.
working the land. But I definitely also see that point. And I understand also, like in a real life context, yeah, like preserving time and energy is real. And like, I don't want to like, I guess, glamorize the process of farming too much by acting like it should be like something that every moment you love. But it brings up for me just like, I guess, and this is just a whole other separate thing that we definitely don't need to get into today, but I feel like as someone that kind of sees like connection to land as like core to life and like liberation, I don't know, I just wonder what other people's perspectives are on like kind of the spirituality aspect, or like the potential for true change making of yourself and the world through like having a radical or a really deep connection to the earth. I don't know. I'm just curious I'm curious what other people think of it too, I guess is all I'm saying.
Anybody else wants to give an insight or share insight about that?
How do you maximize returns on inputs, but at the same time you are preserving the resources?
Again, because what they're saying is, you decrease inputs, and you'll see this as we go forward in the presentation. The theory is, you have a better understanding. When I was talking about like dashboards, where you can kind of look and understand when you need to put inputs, when you can reduce inputs, where those inputs, are going to be most beneficial, at least from an economic standpoint, versus taking, taking it to task, and expanding or maximizing, profits.
Okay.
So, again, you'll see more as we go, but there's a theory behind this, and I don't necessarily agree with it. Definitely not 100%, but there is something to be said, right? There is something to be said about if you can manage, inputs, and we're talking about inputs. I'm not even just talking about chemical inputs. It could be water resources, which we'll get into, stuff like that, right? It's funny. Michael and I were meeting with a prospective student who wants to start working with us, on our backyard and community farm project. And she has a friend in Hayward that has a decent strip of land. And the first thing that she asked, was, well, can I get, paid? Well, can she get paid for her water usage? And essentially, in our project, we pay for a lot of stuff. If somebody is trying to do this, on their own free will, we don't necessarily pay for water, but we need to start talking about it, because we know water is prohibitive. Even using, we use, drip systems and things like that, but we do know there's a cost associated with it. Next slide. So in the early stages of PA, right, in theory, it was born with an introduction to GPS guidance for tractors in the early 90s. Okay. That was the big thing. The adoption of the technology, we know, is widespread globally. Probably the most commonly used example of precision ag today is around tractors. I was mentioning John Deere earlier. John Deere was the first to introduce this technology using GPS location data from its satellites, GPS connected controllers in farmer tractors, automatically, right, that was steering equipment based on coordinates in the field. Okay. So that's kind of some of the evolution, right? And reduce steering, errors by drivers, and therefore any overlap passes on the field. And the idea is supposed to result, and this goes back, Patrick, to what we was talking about, results in less wasted seed, fertilizers or fuel, and time. Those are the inputs, some of the inputs. And so precision agronomics is a term that's related to combining methodology and technology. And at its core, it's about providing more accurate farming techniques for planting and growing crops. Precision agronomics can involve any of the following elements, right? Things like variable rate technology, GPS soil sampling, computer based applications, remote sensing technology, or advocating other advocates for excellence in whatever other best practices may be on farm due to new technologies. And so again, precision kind of meaning, kind of honing in, being precise in terms of data, looking at the science of agriculture as more than that, than the art of farming. Let me say it that way. Next slide. And so think of PA as engaging a variety of technologies. It's just not one. You know, the truth of the matter is you may, and this is where it starts to get controversial, right? It can lead to over or under applications of herbicides, pesticides, irrigation, and fertilizers. Chemical excess from blanket applications often ends up running off or leaching in the fields or groundwater and surface waters, right? And so, you know, most current site-specific management practices use precise global positioning combined with location-specific measurements, either in-field data collection, soil variables, or pest occurrence, or remotely sensed data, right, such as from aircraft or satellites, to quantify spatially variable field conditions. Now, again, on the surface, if you think about the simplicity, right, of certain things. So, anybody here ever had a backyard camera in your garden, a digital camera in your garden that has a remote sensor? Anybody?
I have a time-lapse camera that I use, but it doesn't have a remote.
Okay, but even if it's a time-lapse camera and you can see stages of growth, right? There are some things that some patterns that you can see. So everything ain't necessarily bad. There are some things that can be helpful in looking at growth patterns. You know, and even if those inputs that you're talking about, they don't necessarily have to be fossil fuel based. But if you can really study some of those growth patterns, because you can't watch your plants 24/7, you can't live in your garden 24/7, and see every moment of growth. There are some technologies, that can be useful. But the issue is that really the point of precision agriculture? In most cases, has that been the issue? I'm not so sure.
I could actually see the smoke from last year from all the fires on the
Wow.
camera.
In the camera.
Yeah, in the camera, you could see the haze and like how different the air quality looked just through that camera lens. It was odd, but you could
There
totally
you
see it.
go.
Yep.
There you go. Anybody else? All right, Mike, keep going. So in the evolution and cycle of PA, right, within field operations, you've got to think about examining and adjusting treatments based on spatially referenced management decisions recorded on maps or in management zones. So you can really look at data, analyze it, and you really kind of think about it. Precision technologies now are being developed that can sense microsite specific conditions in real time on the go. Kind of what we were just talking about, right? If you had a satellite or even a camera during the wildfires, there were some things that you could kind of capture on imaging or on film that basically, you could say, wow, and then if there's a need for certain applications, what does it look like? The latter types of technologies require no prior spatial information. They rely on the ability to simultaneously measure soil or plant conditions to affect treatments. Now, we've had a couple of presentations on soil. And I think if you can really follow soil, a lot of the health of your garden or your farm really depends on it. So again, not everything is necessarily bad. Anybody else? Keep going, bro. So how does that really line up with traditional agriculture. PA or site-specific management is more akin to traditional agricultural practices. Small-scale, non-mechanized farming permitted spatially variable treatments. Farmers at the time, this is a time when PA really starts to emerge, possess intimate knowledge of each small corner. Farmers did have to do that manually, but it is time consuming. It is labor cost. One of y'all mentioned a while back, you don't want to just glorify and say every time or every day on the farm is great. I would always say I love every moment. When I was gardening, my back, however, didn't always love it, and so you got to deal with the realities of it. Next. So because agronomic practices were primarily manual and could readily translate that knowledge into location-specific practices, and later agricultural mechanization reduced labor costs. Now, again, the issue of reduced labor costs to me is loaded because we're, none of us want to pay more for what we have than we should. I get it. But what are the unintended consequences of machine-based labor versus human capital? And while, physically there may be some benefits, but also there may be some economic costs. That make y'all feel any kind of way?
Yes, I'm trying not to ruin the punchline, but to me, this is all bad. Because what it does is like it makes it for big giant corporations, to be able to cannibalize all the available space and say we're producing this for the world. And then, but there's a lot of societies around the world that still that agriculture is what they do, so you're actually just not displacing workers, but you're displacing their lifestyle. That's what they do.
Okay.
It's like, and it only benefits the big companies in the long run.
Right.
Yeah.
Here, this last line here. Part of this evolution led farmers to consider variable rate technologies to minimize input costs and mitigate environmental concerns. How does that make you feel?
I feel like with that, oftentimes what I've heard over the last many years of like the GMO seeds that are being sold to people that typically, through history have farmed on their own lands and always saved their seeds. And now they get this new seed that they can't replant. And so it totally decimates their incomes over time. So then they have to sell their land. It just creates this terrible cycle for these technologies that are supposed to feed more people, but really just take away land, take away profits from the people that have been farming the land for generations.
Right.
It's very frustrating.
I don't think mechanization really reduces the cost of labor at the end of the day, because there is other costs related to maybe repairs done on the machine that are used to do the work.
Say that one more time, Patrick.
I'm saying I don't think that there is reduction of labor cost on mechanization of agriculture, because at the end of the day, there are other costs associated with the mechanization.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Keep going, Mike. So while you all are raising these issues, there are many challenges and there are the limitations, of precision agriculture. And I think we need to be real about that, right? While proponents of CPA as vital tools for environmental sustainability, critics view it as antithetical to their own agroecological vision of sustainable agriculture. Um, Scholarly literature focusing on the consequences of the rise of digital farming, particularly on questions of data ownership and farmer autonomy. How has the debate over environmental implications of precision technologies for agriculture unfolded thus far? There is a lot of controversy around it because, from both a socio-political and economic standpoint, there are those that just say, you know, there are those that say that it does not consider the long-term and dire consequences, particularly for indigenous or peasant farmers or poor people that are really just, doing subsistence farming to survive.
Hmm.
Anybody else insights?
I just have this statement. I'd say spiritually, I don't think we need to become more disconnected from the land than we already are, and this is definitely a pathway of disconnecting people and culture from the land that they live on.
Okay. Why don't y'all take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back. I'll give you other couple of thoughts, and then the last half hour, 20 minutes, we will try to answer any questions and try to get you ready for presentations beginning next week.
Let me check this thing out on Zoom.
got Mike 1 minute?
No, it's about up.
Okay, let's get back. Everybody come back in. Mike put the presentation back up. I'm gonna try to do a couple more slides, take us up to 7:30, and then we'll jump in with whatever we can do. So we were talking about those challenges and limitations to precision agriculture. You know, how's the debate over the environmental implications of precision technologies for agriculture unfolded this far, kind of where we left off? How to understand of technology's role in society help us understand the political dynamics of this debate. How does that make y'all feel, think, whatever?
I mean, it makes me think a lot about the sort of the positives that technology has had, but also the unintended consequences, right, of technology, like the things that we've been thinking about. And sort of the same thing to me could apply to precision agriculture and these other technologies, right? Like, yes, I'm sure that there are benefits, but what are the negative impacts of its accessibility? Like Erica and Marissa were saying, you know, like what are the things that could happen that, you know, we don't see, that could happen later on down the road and, you know, cause larger problems. You know, is
Sure.
increased production and efficiency the answer, or is it doing something differently? You know?
Good. Let's move on. So agroecology versus PA. Farmers would be locked into hierarchy. This is what the agroecology argument becomes, that they're often locked into hierarchical based approaches, right? You know, and really looking at, you know, it's just about, private profits and how, PA really serves the needs of industrial farming, industrial agriculture. The other issue is smart agriculture as it's currently developed is not economically suitable for most farmers. I think we got to be real about that, and find the precision agriculture approach is not socially sustainable. Start talking about that earlier. The knowledge transfer mode of precision agriculture mainly follows a top-down procedure when it comes to innovation. So through transdisciplinary, participatory, and transition-oriented research, agroecology links together science, practice, and movements focusing on social change. How does that make you feel? What does that make you think?
It makes me think of like the fallacy of like trickle down economics. Because I mean, yeah, it's true. More money and material and production is being generated. But what does that mean to the individual farmer?
Sure.
Not the tech, not the tech companies or like industrial giants, but like what does that matter if the quality of life of the people, at the bottom of the food chain is not really like substantially improving?
Good. Anybody else?
I know this is not directly addressed, but I think there's a severe danger of letting technology take over and people not knowing how to do these things down the line in the future. You
mean not how to do things manually?
Not how to do things manually, how to know how to take care of soil. So if you don't have a computer with you, or you don't have the satellite researching the land, you don't know. I mean, that knowledge has been passed down for millenniums now. And now we're handing it over, and it only takes a generation to lose that knowledge.
Right. Good point.
And going off of that, it makes us more reliant, like we've been saying, on technology and on these companies. And, what happens later on down the road when we can no longer figure out these solutions on our own because we've been using their systems for so long, and how could that impact the food security later on, right? Not just in our country, but like in other areas of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I feel like we have already lost kind of touch with a lot of this stuff. I mean, we're obviously in this training because we're interested, but I feel like so many people don't know where their food comes from or how to grow their own food. I think it's just a lost knowledge already, oftentimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Very
expect
much
to go
so.
to the grocery store. We expect our food to come from the grocery store, and that's it.
That's right. That's right.
I think people are also just really resistant to that information, because a lot of the time it's not pretty, when you take into account like humanitarian issues or animal abuse issues, et cetera, et cetera.
It makes people uncomfortable, and we do not like to be uncomfortable. And when I say uncomfortable, I'm not just talking about physically, but we don't like to be uncomfortable emotionally either, right?
Exactly. And instead of addressing the things that make us uncomfortable and trying to fix those problems, we'd rather just not have those conversations because that would require a lot of things changing and things probably being less convenient, less efficient, less productive, etc.
Absolutely. Chuck, to the next slide, Mike. Just want to highlight a couple of things about agroecology versus PA again. Part of the problem with agroecological purists with PA is they say that the PA community, looks at agroecology as the agriculture of the past, right? Um, and that's what they've often labeled it. But agroecology combines, uh, uh, scientific research, community-based experimentation, also emphasizing technology and innovation that are knowledge intensive, that they're often low cost and easily adaptable by small and medium scale farmers. I think that's one thing, to really think about. Now, I will say this again, I said this earlier, agroecology also has its detractors, and I'm not talking about from the technological community. I'm not talking about from the industrial farming community, but agroecology has to be very careful because there is a high-hatted approach a lot of times because as a discipline, while indigenous farmers and peasant farmers and and people who've been disenfranchised, who have been engaging in many of these practices as a discipline, it lives in many ways in the academy, and so and the academy is generally not made up in large part of people from indigenous and disenfranchised communities. And so I think it's very, you got to be, you got to tread lightly. I'll tell you, there was a situation I've told you many times before. I've spent most of my career working in ecological, environmental, urban gardening or job training programs with young people at high risk. And there was a woman on my staff who was a department manager, and you know she would go on and on about how she didn't want these kids, mostly who and I say kids, they were really young adults. They were like 17 to 24-year-olds. And she would say, when they were out in the field, if she would see, one of these young people, doing something, like, even if it was accidental, and they killed something, like a salamander or a lizard, that she would go off on them, and she would, scream and holler at them about not taking care of the environment. And sooner or later, one of the other staff people, one of her colleagues said, but you talk about the box lizard, or the California newt, and I'm not saying we shouldn't care about those things, but you talk about them and you disregard the lives of these young people that you should be cultivating every day.
Mm-hmm.
See, you gotta tread lightly with some things. Because if in fact the only thing that I care about, right, is the western pond turtle that inhabits, near streams and creeks, and I love turtles, don't get me wrong, right? Or the salamanders that I used to find playing in creeks when I was a kid, but I don't really care about the issues of the people that live there that have to deal, with asthma and lead, and racial or gender inequities where they live. What is that really saying about me? No matter how much I say that I love agroecology or systems ecology in terms of making a difference in my community. Because then I'm guilty of doing what I accuse the proponents, the opponents, I should say, of climate justice, because now I've deliberately divorced human inhabitants from the environment, or a segment of them, What does that mean? So agroecology, has its detractors too for different reasons. But while I'm a proponent of agroecology because it does imply methodologies to develop a responsible innovation system, right, that allows technologies to respond to real user needs. And that's what we should really be talking about. Mm-hmm. Somebody was mentioned, I forgot who it was. I can't remember if it was Eric or Marissa. One of y'all mentioned, technically the wheel is technology.
Right.
How do we engage people for real life on farm practical solutions? And I don't like to use the word easier, but more accessible, more efficient for all. Next slide. So, agroecology is historically pushed back, not just against precision agriculture, but even for other aspects of industrial agriculture. The resulting technology is as smart, precise, and performing as the one promoted by big data companies. Some of y'all mentioned that, right? Who's the big company on the block? Drip irrigation. We'll talk about that probably next week. Nitrogen fertilization, mycorrhizal fungi. Somebody started talking about that tonight. So we need to start thinking, right, about, just a few examples of advanced agroecological technologies that correspond to the needs of adaptability, performance, and accessibility, right? Low-tech methods can be equally, and this is what we're talking about even about the wheel, right? Can be equally or more effective and are more appropriate for smaller and remote upland farms, and engender less depth, okay? Remember, we're talking about that from the beginning. Or input dependency, the major part of equipment most of the farmers need is affordable, adaptable, and easy to fix. I'm going to stop there. I want to entertain any thoughts or questions about this last part. And then we'll take about 10 minutes to listen, or 15, and answer questions y'all may have about projects, and then we'll end tonight. But any final thoughts about that last segment of the presentation for tonight?
I just said, I totally agree with the statement, and that's why I'm excited about agroecology, and especially in the urban setting, because it lends itself to for people to get back to like having some kind of contact and and control over their food.
Okay, very good. Anybody else?
I think it's really, I really like that last paragraph, because I mean, even in my everyday life, like I so much more appreciate, if something breaks, me being able to fix it, right? Or
Yeah.
because and less like that's happening now. Like more and more times, like things are made to be disposable, or things are so complicated that I myself can't fix it. And then it leads to more cost, or it leads to more waste. And I think having solutions that are easily replicable and that last for for years and years and years, I think that in the long run is going to be better than something fancy and high tech, that could break and then is expensive to repair.
Exactly. Other thoughts? Hello. All right, if there are none, we'll take the next 10 or 15 minutes. If you all have questions as you're preparing for reports. Who's up next week? Is it, you said Sanjita and Erica?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any questions y'all have these last few minutes before we let you out of here today about presentations, thoughts, ideas, format, whatever?
Is it specifically Google Slides or any other thing?
It just needs to be, I would prefer Google Slides or PowerPoint. That just makes it easier for Michael to share.
Mm-hmm. And for you to share to us, because you could just, if you use Google Slides, then I could just link it to the class account and then preserve it like that. But PowerPoint translates too. It just takes a little more.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick logistics question. So when we're doing our presentation, will we be the ones advancing the slides, or will it be Mike?
Mike will, but you'll just have to tell him to advance.
Or
Okay.
or I could do a screen share like we've done before.
Right.
So if you want to do it, then that's fine too.
Okay.
It just depends on how you do your presentation. So
Yeah, I was just asking because sometimes I like to do like a lot of animations in between the slides, when you're like progressing on points or showing different things.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so
Right.
That was my question.
Very well. Anybody else?
I have a question. So how many more classes do we actually have?
How many do we have, Mike? Is it 3 or 4 left?
Actually, yeah, we only have about 3 classes left. I think we're actually gonna go over by about 1 class.
Okay.
Other thoughts? Other questions? All right, if there are no others, then we will see you next Wednesday. We'll start with about 20 to 30 minutes of this technology presentation, get a little bit more of that out the way, and then we will have Erica and Sanjita and be able to, for both presentations, have some Q&A. So I hope folks have a good night. Mike, have you been able to get the flyer or the website fixed so folks can register for the conference next Thursday?
Yeah, so actually the registrations are going through. I can see it on the Zoom who is already registered. So they are going through, but I guess, but what I will do in addition to that is post the actual invite into the Google Classrooms too. So, or Google Calendar. So you'll get a notification before the day comes.
Great. Okay, everybody. Hope you have a good night. Thanks again, and really appreciate your insights.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.